So I got something interesting to share. So here's what I realized. I can once again push my teachings on this channel, but this time I could do it with an even better approach. And I kind of alluded to this being the case earlier along, that I would do this sometime down the road on this channel, that I would talk about this, about quantity versus quality, and how quality beats quantity in some regards, at least. Not necessarily all. Uh, but to do this, so this has to happen at some point. But in order to do this, basically, the only way that I know of for me to do this on this channel, without it just being a repeat of what I've already done, would be to talk about, to start off by combining it with the lesson about traditions. So, as you can see, this is a simple 2-minute read article about traditions. Now, not everybody understands that there are downsides to traditions, and even those that do not really understand all of the downsides. But I can assure you, a lot of people think they know all the downsides of traditions. Most people in history that actually have been convinced that they know all the downsides of traditions, but they did not actually know. So here you see it says traditions like Thanksgiving may be nice in a family setting, but following tradition can be disastrous in the business world. Uh, think about it. Business is traditional, but it doesn't have to be traditional. See, the problem here is that people, strongly religious people, and I do say this, not to be, a prick, but seriously, heavily religious people, and just most people in history who have had a religion or any philosophy, they take parts of philosophy and they apply it the whole way through it, but they only take some parts, some lessons in philosophy. And one of the lessons in philosophy is about business. Is this idea that there is a business in the world of philosophy, and because philosophy is, after all, kind of business, or it's like a business, in the way that it functions, it works, it's a what is it called? There's an actual routine way of things going to work consistently in, to anything there is a consistent routine to things, and philosophy is just another one of them. So there you go. Then you have, that's basically why I was saying it's like business. I was just making a simple analogy that it's similar to business, in that regard. So I really find it really hard to understand why I shouldn't make that analogy, because when I improve my videos on this channel, I often try to expand and build upon what I've already talked about, and I start to try to connect the dots on a much higher level with what I've already said. And you can see the progress over time on this channel if you want to start at the beginning and go all the way to now, but you'll see what I'm talking about. But if you do that, but the bottom line is, think about the simple analogy of a business. It's to philosophy. It's like it has a routine. It's consistent to the routine, whichever religion or philosophy it is, and everything has a routine to it. But some things, the reason everything has a routine is because, that's what they have to be maintained as themselves, as what they are. That is what routine. That is what routine means, anyway. To be unchanging, and that's the problem. It's just like businesses fail. And why? Why do they fail? Because, as it says here, following tradition can be disastrous in the business world. The whole idea of a tradition causes us to turn our brains off and blindly follow the past. So you don't have to do the hard work of critical thinking in the present. See, that's my entire point since the beginning of this channel onward, is that, like a business that failed, philosophy is just the same thing. Failure philosophies, terrible philosophies, major world religions or history, it's no different. They only take some lessons in philosophy, and they try to say, well, this is the only lessons in philosophy that matter. But that's only that this kind of thinking, of course, comes from too much tradition. See, people really try to make things look a lot better than they are. They do a lot of sugarcoating, glossing over the details, and to the point where they actually have been saying, oh, well, tradition is this like really sophisticated, respectable thing because everybody, their justification, or what they call justification, is just these really too overly simplistic, surface level reasons that are just like not valid for their argument. It's just like I've been already saying, it's just like, and that's just what is that? What is that? And I'm telling you what it is. It's tradition. It's not tradition. It's just too much tradition, or it is tradition, but it's also too much tradition. So there are conditions that have to be met for this to happen. Those are the conditions. I'm not saying those are all the conditions, but those are some of them. Those are the ones to pay attention to. The other ones, obviously, anybody knows. I mean, it's the same as asking, well, what are the conditions for event A to happen, or common sense thing X to happen? So, yeah, I mean, it's just like, there's too much tradition in philosophy. There always has been. And it's because it's... Why would they be so traditional? Why would they use too much tradition in philosophy? Like, we get that they did it, but why? Well, the answer is... I mean, sure, it's the answers I've already given, but from the framework of psychologically speaking, why? Because, as it says here again, just reread it. The whole idea of a tradition lets our brains turn off and blindly follow the past. So you don't have to do any hard work of critical thinking in the present. Why? And if that happens, sure, that happens, but why? Why do we turn our brains off, or why do our brains turn off without us knowing, so as to make us do this? Like, why does it happen? I'm not asking you how does it happen. I'm not asking my viewers how does it happen. I'm asking them why. I understand how it happens. I understand why it happens. But as viewers, you should be asking the question, why does it happen? Not how. Because they already know how it happens. At least, I mean, here's the thing. You could even say that actually I should be asking both. Because technically, it seems... Because honestly, they know the how and the why to some degree. But not fully. They only know some of the hows and some of the whys. Like, as I've been saying, those are the variables. Those are the factors. Like, the hows, all the hows of why this happened. How did this happen? Like, if I say, oh, well, the sky is blue. Or looks blue, rather. How does it look blue? Well, you say, oh, well, you could just give a simplistic explanation. And that would mean you only gave some of the variables or reasons that it looks blue. And you just said, Well, it's because of how does it look blue? Because of how chemicals work and how matter works. And give a little bit of explanation behind that, but not the full explanation. If you don't give the full explanation, then it's not a true explanation. It doesn't explain everything, and it still doesn't, it still doesn't necessarily give justification for how it looks blue. It just gives half of the explanation. There's still no valid reason to be convinced. But then if we're talking about the why, well, why does the sky look blue? Well, that's different. Because we ask, why does the sky look blue? Well, that's more philosophical than just the how, because it's more about the deeper meaning and purpose. In the grand scheme of things, long term and short term. That's a much harder question to answer, generally speaking. But ultimately, the how is something that they do not really consider, and the why is something they do not consider when it comes to these things in traditional philosophy. Not to the full degree they're supposed to, and that's why there's so many flawed philosophies. All these lessons in their philosophies, the ones they get right, well, they considered all the hows and the whys of those lessons. But then those things that are criticized heavily in the past by critics, that are lessons in those philosophies, why were they criticized? Because the reason they were criticized because those philosophies themselves do not have sufficient hows and why sufficient amounts of hows and whys. See, we kind of have some sort of thing called an infinite chain of hows and whys. If you don't provide good enough reason or validity because you don't give enough hows and whys for your actions, then it will cause others to do it. And then others will do it as effect of them, and so on and so forth, to infinity. And so basically what happened is you had a bunch of people in the beginning, first civilization. They didn't have enough hows and whys to justify their actions, therefore rendering them completely illogical and irrational. And so, as an effect of that, their offspring were the same way. I mean, things breed themselves. Stupidity breeds stupidity. So that's why you could say that, oh, well, if they didn't have the answers, they didn't have all the answers of the hows and the whys of their existence, then it would follow that they wouldn't have all the hows and whys of their own philosophy. After all, philosophy is it's a reflection of your own beliefs and your knowledge, because beliefs deal with knowledge. I mean, you believe based off what you know, so you know based off what you believe. It's not rocket science. That part isn't rocket science, but still. Let's see. And I mean, you could keep reading this as, if you live in the U.S., blah, 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 never mind, this is old. Surprised this article still has ads on it, given the fact that it's well over 10 years old. Okay. Yeah, they could be disastrous in the business world. Now, okay, so here's a question. Why does the brain do this? Why does it shut off automatically, whether we know it or not? Well, because we're not really controlling our brains. You see, we didn't even create our brains. And assuming God does exist, which the very viewers I'm intending to speak to, the very religious people I'm trying to get through to all this time, assume God created those brains. I mean, if God created those brains, what are the chances that we're perfectly in control of them, despite all the massive mountains of evidence pointing to the contrary? This doesn't make any sense. I mean, they think it makes sense, but in reality, it makes zero sense. So here's the thing. We're not in control of our brains to the fullest of degrees. We're not even close to it. And because of that, we are extremely irrational. And that is one of the conditions that must be met for this story of reality to occur. Story of God's creation to occur. I mean, if otherwise it's just a story of nothing but pleasure. But now I personally already know why that. I mean, according to what I've talked about on this channel, the reason a story of endless pleasure did not happen is because we did not earn the pleasure. I mean, you can't just begin to exist and then just be deserving of infinite pleasure. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I mean, what have you done to deserve infinite pleasure as soon as you're born? Or not born, but as soon as you have manifested into existence? I mean, at that point, you're no better than anybody else. So I don't. And you could say that if you were as good as everybody else, you could earn pleasure, and you could. But if you're just merely existing, if all you're doing is existing and not really thinking anything at all, well, I mean, or you could be thinking, but it could be both positive and negative things, and so that could force you to start accumulating negative debt. Let's just make it easier, simpler. Let's just say you didn't think about anything. Somehow, miraculously, God can make this happen. He just snaps his fingers and all of his creation exists. All living things exist, except they don't think of anything. They're just in a coma of sorts. At this point onward, they don't do anything until he allows them to, until he decides that he wants them to be able to think. But when they don't think, they're not earning anything. So that's why I don't think it makes sense to say that it's our birthright to pleasure. As soon as we're created, we deserve pleasure. It's just, you have to earn it. You don't earn it until you start to think and do as an effect of your thinking. Some actions can only follow from thinking. So, but anyway, bottom line is, the bottom line is, all we have here is a nice article showing again that what I was saying is true, is that, I mean, look what it says. It says, sure, there's a place in the world for traditions, but with fierce global competition, you need to deeply question the traditions of the past and focus more on reinventing the future. So, I mean, but anyway, my point is, let's take a look at this. This connects to the other things I was saying, is that it's this narcissistic stuff again. Well, we are superior to others, or I am superior to others. I mean, that's all it is. That's the entire thing. It starts it all off. I mean, it doesn't start it all off, but it doesn't start off their madness, no. I mean, this is what starts off their madness. Again, it's the brain. If you wanted to say anything started off their madness, don't say it's their narcissism, because that's confusing. That's going to be very confusing for them, because then they're going to say, well, the reason for our narcissism is our narcissism, which is circular. No, there has to be something that precedes their narcissism to make them be narcissistic. Because things don't just happen, they're caused to happen by other things, after all. as I've already talked about millions of times on this channel. So again, let's see. Yeah, I mean, oh well, they think they're superior to others. And if you and just imagine if you thought you were superior to others or everybody around you, just imagine what kinds of things you would be thinking about or doing in life, no matter where you went or what situation you were in or what the conditions were like. Now imagine that everybody, or most people that have ever lived in this world, are like that. And their reasons for it are all very different, depending on their traditions and their philosophies and their cultures. So, and some of their reasons are similar and the same, and others are not. So imagine that's just because that's just how their brains made them be. It's not because they knew from the beginning that this is what they were doing. It's not. I've already proven that they did not know. Already proven that countless times on this channel. And what else does it say? Well, if you're having trouble with that idea, now take a look at this idea. How about the idea that this could have been something that was unconscious, an unconscious attempt to overcompensate for self-doubt, low self-esteem, or insecurity? Avoiding responsibility can be a response to trauma. Now, I think that might just be something worth looking at for my viewers. I mean, seriously. I talked about this to holy hell. Think about it. When you're unconscious, you can do things while you're unconscious. Think about when we sleep. Are we doing things when we sleep? Of course we are. But we're unconscious. Now, I'm not saying we're asleep while we are on our 2 feet. I mean, in some regard, I guess you could say we are asleep to things. That's why they say, stay woke. These people are sleeping on these things. Because it is a form of sleep, it's just not with your eyes closed. Sleeping, eyes wide open, walking around like a zombie. I mean, today that's considered greatness and enlightenment. And, something to be proud of. It's everything is, not everything, but a lot of things are just, that's a philosophical matter of life. It's a philosophical question. Is that, what is greatness? What is good and what is bad? What is shameful? These are all philosophical things. And as I've already shown time and time again, they're not good. The average neurotypical in history has not been good at philosophy. They've always been very bad at it. So, so if they were doing things that were irrational in the name of philosophy, if they were doing things that philosophy would say is not logical, I would wager that it wasn't because they were doing it because they're above the philosophy, transcendental gods or something that they make themselves out to be. This is what the narcissist thinks, that it's above all others. It's a transcendental god, above philosophy and all things, or above so many things. But ultimately, the narcissist fails at the attempt to prove this, because his entire existence is completely dominated by its weak brain chemistry. So it's just it's an unconscious attempt, as it says here, to overcompensate for self-doubt, low self-esteem, or insecurity, which is, of course, the only reason that is done is to avoid trauma. And as I've said, as I said from the beginning, what we do is to avoid trauma. We don't do things just to get pleasure. We also do things just to avoid trauma. And again, as I've said on this channel, I mean, those are the only two gold mines of existence. It's trauma and it's pleasure. So, I mean, without them, we're just thinking. We're robots. Think about robots and AI that have been developed in history. They don't actually have emotions. If at best they have a mimicry of emotions, but emotions are a part of the actual mind. It's part of, an actual consciousness. It's a living thing, which robots are not. They're not living, so they don't have emotions. They do not have. So they are zombies in a way. They don't have free will. They're programmed, and that's what the brain does to the user. It zombifies them. It enslaves them. It's why people make comparisons of computers to brains, because it's a physical thing. All things physical, including the brain, are all together, like as a team, to some degree, because they're all physical. That's why, just because they are. And so they're going to wreak havoc on the spiritual, which is living things, the mind, immaterial things like thoughts, which create the mind. And so, in reality, it's not like physical things will be constructed in a way to be, naturally they would go to war with the immaterial things. This is even evident by the fact that the physical tries to imitate the spiritual, as some have said. But anyway, I mean, if you could understand one thing, that, look, this is how narcissists think. That's one thing, but that doesn't mean you understand why they do it, or how they do it, which are both very important. And I do think that the reason a lot of people struggle today to understand this stuff, is because they don't have the answers to those questions, to the how and the why of narcissism, but they do use narcissism. And because they use it, they do not understand the how and the why of narcissism. But they do not know that they are using this narcissism, though, which is why people are so dangerous. For example, it doesn't have to be narcissism. Being lacking awareness of the self doesn't have to be out of narcissism. It doesn't have to be a form of narcissism. It could just be a lack of self-awareness. For example, the mentally ill who are not really diagnosed with narcissism, or at least not a high level of narcissism. Some of their actions and mistakes were not out of high level narcissism, or even narcissism at all. It's just that they lack self-awareness. Why? Why did this happen? I mean, it's for the reason I've already said countless times. There's the answer. Ultimately, you see, it's all to avoid the trauma. They know, they can at least understand that what they get is trauma if they try to break the cycle of tradition philosophically. And so they don't attempt to do it. And in any attempt they try, their brain fails at it. So that's why the average neurotypical in history, is submissive to tradition and tyranny. They're unable to think for themselves and care for themselves in a philosophical manner, but they can at least care for themselves regardless. Because philosophy is not everything. It's not all there is to life. Although, depending on your philosophy, it could be a major aid to your self-care. such as the case with narcissists. It puts them in a much more comfortable paradigm than would a non-narcissist who is painfully aware of the idiocy. Although even the non-narcissist being aware of this is able to reap benefits from it. After all, they are have a sense of superiority and entitlement to such, given that they know that they are correct, whereas the narcissist is wrong and has failed to stop this, which is, after all, according to the non-narcissist, right, a good thing and actually is a form of justice. But still, ultimately, the bottom line is, how does this relate to quantity and quality? That's the big question, and that's the thing I was asking in the beginning of this video. You see, the how and the why relates to quantity and quality. And I'm not assigning quantity and quality respectively to either one of those two. After all things are connected, just to different degrees. So it can't be that quality is exclusively to the how and the why is exclusively to quantity. I mean, it's not how it works. So, if anything, I would say that quantity is it does create quality, because the more of something there is, it just depends on what it is. But in that way, you could say quality is like preceding quantity, because how can quantity be great without the number of things there being qualitative, more geared towards quality in the first place? For example, if you had $100 in America, well, that's great and all, but what if you're not allowed to use them for the things you really need under some stupid law or set of laws? Or what if you're only allowed to use some of them the way you need under some set of stupid laws? But let's say you had $10 in America later after that, then you could use them any way you want for the things you need. So that shows that quality matters a lot. It's not like, oh, well, I have more of the dollar, therefore I'm better than I was before when I only had less of the dollar. But that could be the case. That could happen, but only if the actual contents of the dollars being compared are set up to make that be the case. So maybe my $100, each of those $100 is vastly superior to the $5. But the same way, $5 could be superior to $100, just depending on how they can be used, what they're under what laws. So really, quantity is useless without the quality, because in such a way that no matter how many things you have, if the things that you have aren't useful, it's not enough. But at the same time, you could say that, oh, well, if you had, let's say you had $1,000, right? Or let's say you had $10,000 in America, but there's heavy restrictions on how they can be used when it's $10,000 total. But then but then on the other hand, there could be a situation where you only have $100, but there's absolutely no restrictions that are present with the $10,000 situation. Which would be better? Obviously, I think it would be the $100 because of the restrictions. But what if with the $10,000, what if the more money you added to it, the less the more restrictions on it would be lifted slowly, linearly over time. So in that way, you could say that quantity could be quality, but the only way quantity can beat some sort of quality is with a quality that is exclusive to it itself anyway. So if quantity ever did beat quality, if a quantity ever did beat a quality, it would need a quality to help it do it in the first place. That's basically what I'm saying. So basically, quantity can never beat quality without an external quality anyway. So why am I saying this? Well, the reason I'm saying this is simple. Tradition is the same logic applies to tradition in philosophy. Like I've been saying and proving on this channel for a long time. The people of the world can literally they can create as many traditions as they want, as many religions as they want throughout history, and put in as many convoluted things as they want in it. But that will never beat a religion that gets everything right, or at least a religion that doesn't get anything wrong. Even if they put in more and more and more good things, even if they improved it over time. So, ultimately, only one can hold more weight than the other. They can't be of equal weight if they don't contain all the same things, or if or they can contain different things, but if they're not of equal value, then it won't be valid to say that they are just as good as one another. So one will ultimately outweigh the other. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say here is simple. My religion is better than the neurotypical religion because it just doesn't leave any room for that kind of problem where they can put in so much more stuff that it's actually better. Because they could say, oh, well, ours is better because it just puts in, it's not better philosophically, but it's better in some other way. But as I've already explained, philosophy is the highest of quality that there is. So no matter how much you put in, no matter how great they make themselves in other regards, it'll never beat this religion of mine because it's always the best philosophically. So in a philosophical competition, their philosophy is useless because it never actually accomplishes the feats that mine does. But is it greater overall because it's greater in other regards? No, because as I've said many times, and I just said, philosophy is the highest quality. It's the highest attainable thing, because it's spirituality and it's enlightenment. And it's all encompassing all things, and it's getting down to what is deepest in reality and what is outside of reality, and it questions all things. Whereas everything else that we use does not really have to deal or work as closely with all things. So it just automatically loses against my philosophy. So, what does the Bible have to say about this matter? What does it have to say about quantity and quality? Well, I don't really know what it says, but take what I said and then take a look. Take a look at what it says about quantity and quality. and then compare it to what I said about quantity and quality, and see if the Bible actually agrees with my ideas. And if you think the Bible is right and I'm wrong, that's one thing, but that doesn't prove, just because you think it's right and I'm wrong, well, that doesn't prove that it is. It just proves that you think it is. So, but anyway, that's all I have to say for now. There's really nothing more to add, nothing left to prove in this video for my arguments. But I hope you enjoyed, and that's all. I'm out. Bye.